Hi there, I'm Laci. Ever had your own family turn your home into a battleground without you even knowing? That's exactly what happened to me. They moved in without asking, erased my name from our history, and tried to steal everything I built. And that was just the beginning. How do you fight when the people you loved the most become your biggest enemies? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever felt like a stranger in your own family? Also, what time are you listening to this and where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. The evening air clung to my skin as I pulled into my driveway, exhaustion coiling tightly around my shoulders after a brutal week out of town. The sight that greeted me snapped me awake. Two unfamiliar cars wedged next to mine, their trunks yawning open, boxes spilling onto the pavement. My stomach tightened. I climbed the front steps, the keys clinking between my fingers. From inside came laughter, too loud, too familiar. I hesitated, heart knocking once against my ribs, then shoved the door open. There they were, my parents, my sister, her husband, their two shrieking kids. My living room looked like a storage unit exploded, half-unpacked boxes, clothes slung over furniture, the scent of fried food curling through the air. "Hey, honey, you're back early!" my mother chirped, tossing me a smile as if this was a normal Sunday barbecue, not an ambush. I stood there, stunned. What is going on? My father thudded another box onto my floor. "We figured it was time we all got closer again," he said, not looking at me. No one had called, no one had texted, no one had asked. I dropped my bag and followed the chaos into the kitchen, where my sister had already stocked the fridge with groceries I hadn't bought, my home, my life. And somehow I wasn't even part of the conversation. "We thought you wouldn't mind," Mom said, plucking a bottle of wine from my shelf like it belonged to her. "Mind?" my voice cracked. "You moved in without telling me. You didn't even ask." Dad shrugged. "Family sticks together. You have the space." I stared at them, words splintering in my throat. Every photo frame, every corner of my life I'd clawed together after years of being invisible to them, now colonized without a second thought. "We need to talk," I said, forcing calm into my voice. It vibrated with fury anyway, but they didn't want to talk. They wanted comfort without consequence. Dinner that night was served without me. They passed plates, traded jokes, while I stood at the doorway, unnoticed. My chair at the table was covered with a stack of folded laundry that wasn't mine. When I spoke up again, demanding to understand how they thought this was acceptable, they brushed me aside like static. Dad chuckled and said, "Don't be so dramatic, Laci. It's not a big deal." It was a big deal. It was my life. The next few days blurred into a slow nightmare. Conversations floated past me at the breakfast table like I wasn't there. They planned family outings in hushed tones I wasn't included in. They even rearranged my living room furniture without asking, claiming it felt more homey this way. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a reminder. This house was no longer mine. Late one night, lying stiff on the couch because my own bedroom had been temporarily reassigned to my sister's kids, I stared at the dark ceiling. The ceiling fan whirred, slicing the silence into restless pieces. "This was never a home to them," I whispered into the dark. "Just another conquest." My phone buzzed sharply against the coffee table. I grabbed it, half hoping it was a mistake, but the notification made my blood run cold. New event created. Family housewarming party at Laci's place. The lights of the community center glowed warmly against the deepening twilight. I forced a breath into my lungs, adjusting the hem of my jacket as I stepped inside. Laughter and the clinking of glasses floated through the air, wrapping the room in a brittle excitement. Maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. They were honoring families who had given back to the neighborhood. I spotted my parents and Shannon clustered near the stage, their faces lit up with the easy glow of entitlement. I sank into a chair at the edge of the crowd, folding my hands tightly in my lap. Brenda, the event organizer, took the mic. "We owe so much to families like the Moores," she beamed, "particularly Shannon, for her leadership, her sacrifices, her unwavering support." The room erupted into applause. My name never crossed her lips. I sat frozen, the weight of the moment pinning me in place. I'd spent years helping my family, funding their projects, fixing their disasters. And now I didn't even exist. Brenda's words blurred into white noise, each cheer from the audience another lash across my skin. That's just how it is, I overheard Dad mutter behind me to another neighbor. Shannon's the real heart of this family. I stood there long after the applause died, anchored by humiliation so deep it tasted metallic in my mouth. That night, I scrolled through Facebook, dread prickling my fingertips. Post after post bloomed on my feed, pictures of my house, my porch swing, my donated furniture. Only I wasn't in any of them. They had cropped me out like an unwanted stain. Shannon has given so much, one caption read. A true leader in every sense. Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments showering her with praise. I stared at a photo where I had stood at the edge of the porch during the event. They'd simply sliced me out, like I'd never been there at all. The bile of betrayal rose up my throat. I tapped the screen, zooming in mindlessly, searching for any trace of myself they hadn't erased. There was none. I curled up on my bed, the glow of my phone screen washing my room in sterile blue. Memories stabbed at me, renovations I funded when the roof caved in, hospital bills I paid when Dad got sick, the nights I skipped my own dreams to babysit my sister's kids. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being rewritten. They weren't just ignoring me anymore. They were erasing me. 16 years ago, I'd begged them to notice when I got my first big promotion. They didn't even show up to the party. I should have learned then. Tears blurred the screen. I wiped them away with the heel of my hand, a steel thread stitching itself inside my chest. If they wanted to erase me, they were going to learn that foundations matter, and I had built every brick of this life they now called theirs. Late into the night, I sat at my desk, the house dead quiet around me except for the occasional groan of old wood. I flipped open my laptop, the screen's cold light reflecting in my eyes. One by one, I started pulling up files, mortgage documents, deed records, tax receipts, every paper trail leading right back to me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a slow smile curving my lips. If they thought they could rewrite history, they'd soon realize I was the one holding the original manuscript. The envelope was thick, a fat wad of bills and notices mistakenly routed to my office instead of home. I flipped through them absently at first, until I spotted it. My name, missing. Utility bills for my house, now addressed to Shannon and Brenda. My stomach knotted as I rifled through the rest. Gas, electric, water, all bearing their names, not mine. That evening, I walked into the house with the stack clutched tight in my hands. I found them in the living room, laughing over a sitcom rerun like nothing had changed. "What's this?" I demanded, slapping the bills onto the coffee table. Brenda glanced over without concern. "Oh, that? We thought it'd be easier to split costs." "You thought?" My voice cracked against the walls. "This is my house. You don't get to decide." Shannon rolled her eyes. "God, Laci, it's not a big deal. You've always been so dramatic." I stared at them, feeling the ground shift under my feet. I wasn't dramatic. I was being erased, piece by piece, and they expected me to stand there smiling while it happened. Number. Later that night, heart hammering against my ribs, I opened my laptop and pulled up the county records site. A sense of dread twisted inside me as I typed in the address. There it was, bold as daylight. A pending request to add Shannon as a co-owner. The filing listed Brenda as a witness and cited family caregiving responsibilities as justification. Primary caretaker. For who? I wasn't dying. I wasn't incapacitated. They wanted my life without lifting a finger. The screen blurred for a moment as rage rose like a furnace in my chest. I blinked it back, breathing shallowly, forcing my hands to steady. I downloaded every record, printing copies, stacking them neatly. When the printer jammed halfway through, I slammed my hand against it, cursing under my breath. 16 years ago, they didn't even bother showing up at the hospital when I almost lost my first apartment to an eviction notice. I had clawed out of that hole myself, and now they thought they could waltz in and strip me bare again. I wasn't that girl anymore. I locked my bedroom door behind me and tucked the files away in a safe I hadn't touched in years. The click of the lock felt final, irrevocable. "You wanted a war?" I murmured into the heavy silence. "You're about to lose everything." My phone buzzed, slicing through the tension like a blade. I snatched it up, an unknown number. "Miss Moore? This is Lisa, Mr. Hutchinson's assistant. He's available for an emergency meeting first thing tomorrow. Shall I book you in?" I stared at the screen, every nerve in my body alight. "Book it," I said, "and tell him it's urgent." The invitation slid under my door on cheap floral stationery. "Family dinner. Let's reconnect," it chirped, punctuated with an overzealous smiley face. I knew better. This wasn't an olive branch, it was a setup. Still, curiosity and a simmering need to witness their next move pulled me there. By the time I arrived, the living room was transformed. White streamers sagged along the ceiling, balloons printed with new beginnings bobbed limply in the humid Texas air. Brenda's laugh floated through the kitchen, too high-pitched, too sweet. I smelled trouble the way a dog smells a storm. "Laci, you made it," Shannon called, arms wide, fake warmth dripping from every syllable. I smiled thinly, slipping inside. Everyone was there. Distant cousins, neighbors, faces half familiar and buzzing with whispered curiosity. I scanned the room. No escape routes looked dignified. I'd have to play this through. Dinner blurred past in a charade of forced cheer. I picked at my plate while Brenda clinked a fork against her glass. "We're gathered here," she said, voice trembling with self-satisfied emotion, "to honor family, to celebrate all the sacrifices made, and the love that built this house we now all share." Applause broke out, sharp and eager. I froze, fork midway to my mouth. "Laci," Shannon chimed in, locking eyes with me, "we couldn't have done it without your generosity." The way she said it, like a knowing wink without moving her face, made my skin crawl. Then came the final blow. They presented a memory table in the corner, framed receipts from Home Depot, an old greeting card I'd sent after paying for a minor repair, a wilted plastic plant from my college days, each labeled as gifts that, they claimed, symbolized my willing transfer of ownership. Guests murmured appreciatively. Some clapped. I even caught someone snapping a photo. The room spun around me like a slow, suffocating carousel. I stood there, a frozen ghost at my own funeral. 16 years ago, Brenda couldn't even remember my birthday without a calendar reminder. Now she could apparently remember me gifting away my life's work with a plastic fern. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I smiled, razor thin and poisonous enough to sour the wine. Around me, the party rolled on in syrupy, false merriment. Toasts were made. Brenda and Shannon basked in their stolen spotlight. I noted every face that smiled too easily, every voice that laughed too loud. Witnesses, future liabilities. By the end of the night, the air was thick with lies and the stink of cheap champagne. As I moved to leave, a figure near the door caught my eye. David, the quiet legal clerk from 2 blocks over, sipping punch alone. Our eyes met. Recognition flickered. I sidled up beside him, feigning casual interest. "Funny night, huh?" I said lightly. He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah. Strange energy." I leaned closer, lowering my voice until it was a thread of silk against his ear. "I might have a case for you, one they won't see coming." David stiffened slightly, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly. I walked away without another word, heels clicking like gunshots against the tile, leaving behind a room full of traitors who thought they had already won. I walked into the sterile office building downtown, with a calmness that felt foreign on my skin. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step a small declaration. In my hand, 2 white envelopes, formal, cold, final. I found Brenda first, behind her desk at the community center, scribbling notes onto a clipboard. Her eyes widened as I placed the envelope gently on top of her papers. You've been served, I said, voice steady. No theatrics, no explanations, just that. Then I turned and found Shannon in the adjacent hallway, laughing too loudly with a group of coworkers. The laughter died the second she spotted the envelope in my hand. I handed it to her without a word, our fingers brushing for a second, hers trembling ever so slightly. Walking away, I didn't look back. Let them stew. Let them panic. I barely had time to enjoy the first ripple of fear I'd sown before the next ambush came swinging. The community charity auction was supposed to be neutral ground, a showcase of smiling faces and meaningless bids. Instead, it became Shannon's stage. She found the microphone during the cocktail hour, raised her champagne glass, and with an exaggerated laugh said, "You know, it's funny how some people think charity begins with suing your own family." Polite chuckles. A few sharp glances. A handful of guests leaned in, savoring the drama. Family, she continued, tossing her blonde hair like a bad soap opera actress, should be about trust, right? Not lawyers and threats. But I guess some folks just don't get it. The room broke into nervous laughter. I stood there, glass in hand, face an icy mask. Every instinct screamed at me to lash out, to scream back the truth. Instead, I sipped my wine slowly and marked every face that laughed, every smile that twisted at my expense. 16 years ago, at my high school graduation, Shannon had stolen my valedictorian speech and passed it off as her own. I had swallowed that betrayal because I thought family mattered more. Never again. Later that night, in the quiet sanctity of my home, I sat with David and Ms. Preston, my lawyer and private investigator, at my dining table, a battleground now cluttered with papers. "This isn't about emotions anymore," I said, spreading out a series of bank statements, text messages, photos, receipts. "It's about facts." Ms. Preston nodded, pushing a small recorder closer to me. "Every word matters now, every timeline." I signed affidavits, compiled notarized testimonies, organized archives of maintenance payments and renovation contracts I had covered alone. My stomach knotted with every memory of unpaid favors and backhanded gratitude, but I didn't falter. Each click of a binder ring snapping shut was another nail hammered into the coffin of their lies. We worked deep into the night. Outside, the Texas sky bruised into a heavy black, the heat still clinging to the sidewalks like regret. Around 2 a.m., David leaned forward, his face lit only by the blue-white glow of my laptop. "We found something," he said, voice low. "Bigger than we thought." I froze mid-sip of coffee. "How big?" He slid a document toward me. A trust deed Brenda had filed decades ago, long forgotten, that named me as the sole beneficiary to the property in question, invalidating any claim they had fabricated. I stared at it, heart hammering once, twice, before falling into a cold, steady rhythm. "Then we use it," I whispered. The storm was coming, and this time, I wouldn't just survive it, I would ride it straight through them. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. I stood on the porch, fingers brushing over the thick official seal. Court summons. Brenda was suing me for defamation. I exhaled once, sharp and controlled. For a second, anger coiled hot and wild under my skin, begging for release. But it burned out just as quickly, replaced by something colder, sharper. Desperation. That's all this was. A desperate play from someone losing ground. By noon, I was sitting across from David again, the office dim and heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and tension. "They think they can corner you," he said, tapping the document with a finger. "But they've made a mistake." He outlined it clearly. Brenda's claim was flimsy, emotional, based on half-truths that would crumble under scrutiny. Meanwhile, our evidence of fraud and manipulation was ironclad. "We're not just going to defend," I said, voice steady. "We're going to attack." Within 48 hours, David filed a countersuit against Brenda and Shannon. Fraud, emotional distress, malicious intent. Every receipt, every altered document, every recorded lie, all of it carefully cataloged and weaponized. The first court date arrived under a sky heavy with late summer thunderclouds. In the courtroom, the air hummed with suppressed energy. I sat at the defendant's table, spine straight, face unreadable. Brenda sat across from me, stiff in her seat, mouth pressed into a tight, angry line. She avoided my eyes until the judge entered, then darted glances at me filled with venom. The hearing was short, procedural, but revealing. When Brenda was asked to present her case, her voice cracked. She fumbled, contradicting herself within minutes. Her lawyer tried to steer her back, but the damage was done. Even the judge's eyebrows lifted in mild disbelief when Brenda lashed out, accusing me of being ungrateful, selfish, a disgrace to the family. "Mrs. Dean," the judge cut her off sharply, "this is a court of law, not a family dinner table." I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. Restraint was my armor now, and I wore it perfectly. After the hearing, David and I huddled at my house with Ms. Preston. The strategy shifted. We weren't just defending anymore. We were on the offensive. Ms. Preston slid a thick folder across the table. Inside, documentation of a small, shady nonprofit Brenda and Shannon had founded, funneling donations into their personal accounts under the guise of community projects. "They thought no one would look closely," she said with a shrug. "It was more than enough. Proof of fraud, proof of deceit, and ironically more grounds for emotional distress. My reputation had been dragged through the mud while they built their lies on my back." As I sifted through the papers, faces flashed through my mind. Neighbors who had turned away at the charity event, old friends who hadn't called back. My fists curled at my sides. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about every scar they had tried to carve into my life. By nightfall, everything was ready. Subpoenas were prepared, witness lists compiled, evidence folders sorted by categories that left no wiggle room for interpretation. I stood on the courthouse steps the next morning, holding the subpoena paperwork in my hand. The sky above was a brutal, cloudless blue, the kind that made you squint and ache. "This time," I whispered, staring at the bold print of Brenda's name on the summons, "they'll answer for everything." I tucked the papers under my arm and smiled, not the brittle, exhausted smile they had beaten into me over the years. This one was sharp, steeled, ready for war. The whispers hit before the sun even rose. A co-worker's hesitant glance. A neighbor's half-swallowed greeting. The tightening coil of dread in my chest didn't loosen until I scrolled through my phone. There it was. Vague, toxic hints about a scandal involving my professional ethics, my private life, even my mental stability. Crafted just enough to stir doubt. Designed just enough to feel familiar. I closed my eyes, breathing through the spike of anger. I knew exactly who pulled the strings. By Saturday, the air around the family gathering was so charged it might as well have crackled. Relatives milled around the rented event hall, buzzing like flies over roadkill. Some wouldn't meet my eyes. Others asked questions that wore polite smiles like poorly fitted masks. "Is it true you had some financial troubles?" an aunt whispered, clutching her wine glass like a lifeline. "Oh, honey, you must be so stressed right now," another cousin simpered, voice dripping sympathy too thick to be real. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I answered nothing, offering only the kind of tight smile that never reached the eyes. Let them twist themselves into knots. Late that night, after the last fake hug and brittle laughter had faded into silence, I sat in my car outside the hall and stared into the black void ahead. My lawyer's words echoed from our earlier call. We found the source. Brenda, Shannon, bribed witnesses, forged documents, fabricated emails supposedly showing me begging for financial help years ago. All of it, messy, desperate, easily unraveled by anyone willing to pull the right thread. I wouldn't just pull the thread. I would rip the whole damn tapestry apart. The high-profile town event 2 days later was supposed to be a community fundraiser. It turned into something else the moment I stepped onto the stage. Microphone in hand, I scanned the sea of expectant faces, some smirking, some suspicious, a few concerned. Brenda and Shannon stood near the back, laughing too loudly at nothing, their eyes flickering toward me and then away. I inhaled, steadied my voice. I know there have been stories. My tone was calm, almost gentle. About me, my character, my history. Murmurs rippled across the crowd. Phones lifted, recording. I'm here, I continued, to set the record straight. The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in exposure. I presented screen captures of altered documents, copies of real transactions proving ownership and stability, testimonials from witnesses who had come forward once the pressure was off. I held nothing back. You've been lied to, I said quietly. Manipulated. Used. By the time I finished, the silence was so deep it swallowed sound itself. Brenda's face had turned a shade of crimson I hadn't seen since we were kids, and she got caught sneaking money from Mom's purse. Shannon, usually so quick to mask, was pale and rigid. Someone clapped, then another, then a scattering of applause that swelled into something deafening. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was a shift, a rupture in the wall they had built around their version of the truth. As the crowd dispersed, avoiding Brenda and Shannon like a stain, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Shannon stood there, smiling, that brittle, dangerous smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You think this is over?" she whispered, so low only I could hear. "It's not." Then she was gone, slipping into the crowd, her words curling around me like smoke. I stood rooted to the spot, the thunder of applause fading into an eerie, unsettling quiet. Triumph tasted sharper than I expected, and somewhere beneath it, something darker stirred. Victory tasted like ash. Sitting alone in my living room, the applause and flashing cameras from the town event already felt like they belonged to someone else's story. Brenda's whispered threat clung to my skin like a cold mist I couldn't shake off. The next morning, while waiting for my coffee at a downtown shop, I felt her presence before I saw her. Brenda stormed through the door, wild-eyed and disheveled. She marched right up to me, her voice a venomous hiss. "You think you've won, you little snake? You're nothing without us." Heads turned, phones lifted. I didn't move. I held her gaze until she faltered, the rage in her face collapsing into something desperate and ugly. Without a word, I picked up my coffee and walked out, the weight of her fury pressing between my shoulder blades. That afternoon, the city hosted a street festival for local businesses. Families laughed, vendors shouted, music floated through the air. It should have been a slice of peace. Instead, it became Brenda's stage. I was browsing a booth when the shouting started. "There she is!" Brenda slurred, climbing onto a bench, waving a bottle like a flag. "Miss Perfect, lying to everyone, pretending she's better than her own blood." A hush fell. Cameras turned like flowers tracking the sun. Brenda's tirade grew louder, less coherent, accusations spilling from her lips. I watched, detached, as she destroyed what little reputation she had left in a matter of minutes. Later that evening, my lawyer moved swiftly. We filed for a restraining order, a civil suit for defamation, and harassment backed by the mountain of evidence we had meticulously built over the months. When the court hearing arrived, Brenda's lawyer barely fought. The restraining order was granted immediately, damages awarded, conditions laid bare. Brenda was to cease all contact, pay restitution, and publicly retract her statements. In the sterile courtroom, Brenda crumbled. She sobbed, pleaded, accused everyone but herself. Friends who once flanked her kept their eyes low, their loyalty evaporated. Even Shannon, stone-faced, refused to meet her gaze. I stood watching the scene unfold, feeling empty. 16 years ago, at a different courthouse, I had waited on the cold marble steps for someone to come pick me up after Brenda forgot about me. That memory surfaced, sharp and unwanted. Some things never changed. Only now, I wasn't the one left behind. Outside, the sky stretched wide and indifferent. I lingered on the courthouse steps, breathing deep. The fight was over, or so I thought. At home, a plain envelope sat on my doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside, a single piece of paper, a few lines, handwritten in blocky, unfamiliar script. "You've only seen the surface. There's more buried underneath. Look closer." My stomach turned to ice. I glanced around, heart hammering. The street was empty, but the shadows felt heavier than before. I folded the letter slowly, every muscle in my body taut. The war might have ended, but the battlefield was far from cleared. For the first time in months, I woke to a morning flooded with sunlight, soft and golden across my bedroom floor. No knots in my stomach, no heavy breath in my lungs. Just quiet. Just peace. I smoothed down my blazer, checking myself once more in the mirror before heading out. Today wasn't about survival, it was about beginning again. A new job interview waited for me downtown, a fresh chapter not haunted by shadows. Driving through Austin's streets, the city buzzed with its usual energy, yet I moved through it differently now, stronger, unafraid. Later, after the interview, where the handshake was firm, the smiles genuine, I found myself at the park near Lady Bird Lake. The one where Brenda and I used to meet for picnics when things between us were still uncomplicated, still coated with childish hope. 16 years ago, we sat right here, sharing cherry popsicles, making promises we were too young to understand. The breeze carried faint echoes of laughter, memories stitched into the air like invisible threads. I traced the path by the water's edge, letting the past settle without letting it control me. The letter from the other day burned in my bag, unanswered questions smoldering at the back of my mind. Forgiveness is not forgetting. I hadn't figured out who sent it. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point was that forgetting was never truly the goal. Healing was choosing not to let the wounds define me. At my new office, tucked into the corner of a refurbished building downtown, a plain envelope awaited on my desk. I hesitated before opening it, my hands steady despite the racing of my heart. Inside, a recent photo of me stepping out of my house, unaware, no signature, no threats, just the caption scrawled beneath it. Keep watching. It's never over. I placed the photo down carefully. A cold, familiar tingle traced my spine, but I didn't crumble. Fear had been my captor once. It wouldn't be again. Instead, I buried myself in building something real. I launched a mentorship program for women who had been manipulated, financially controlled, emotionally broken. I met with lawyers, counselors, and survivors who refused to be silent anymore. We didn't scream our pain into the world. We built ladders over it. One evening, sitting in the same park, I watched children chase each other under the fading sun, their shrieks of laughter tangled with the sound of water lapping against the banks. I smiled faintly, tracing the rim of my coffee cup. My phone buzzed against the wooden bench. Unknown number. I froze, thumb hovering above the screen. The air shifted, holding its breath with me. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. I drew a breath deep into my chest, feeling the earth firm beneath my feet, the open sky stretching overhead. And then, with a calm born of fire, I answered. Looking back, I realized life's battles aren't always about winning over others. It's about reclaiming your own voice, no matter how many times it's been silenced. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the betrayal. It means choosing to stand taller because of it. In the quiet spaces where hurt once lived, we have the power to plant strength, resilience, and hope. If there's one truth I've learned, it's this. Protect your worth like you protect your life. No one else will fight for it the way you can. We don't heal by pretending it didn't happen. We heal by refusing to let it define who we become. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for yourself changed your life? What would you tell your younger self today? Share your story in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect, comment 1, or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't connect with you, I'd still love to hear why. Your thoughts matter. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories that move, empower, and inspire. There's so much more ahead. Let's keep growing together.